Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, here at my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K311 The Ultimatum. And yeah, this is I think a pretty good episode overall. Again, kind of a little bit of like the first half of the episode being a little slow as like we continue to set things up for the finale, but the second half at the Air Temple absolutely makes up for it. It's some of the most intense action, the best emotion that we get here, and it's an example of, I suppose, what the book has actually done well, that they managed to get the emotion out of these scenes, that the focus characters here really are, you know, the likes of Tenzin, Kai, Opal to a degree. We'll talk about the use of Opal here, and just the fact that we finally, I suppose, brought the two main plot points together of new airbenders and the Red Lotus, and that's what the ultimatum actually is. In that sense, it's a kind of clever reveal, but it's also one where it's kind of like, because of, I suppose, what the Red Lotus are and the sort of reputation they have, you almost expect their big ultimatum, their clever plan, to be a little bit more clever than it just being threatening the new airbenders as a way to kind of blackmail Korra. And I talked a bit before about how I do feel some of these setup moments in book 3 are a little unsatisfying when they happen. We'll talk about it when we get to the end reveal about what their plan is once they capture Korra. But here, it works well enough in that, like, it wasn't too much of a cliffhanger, in that it is revealed relatively early on in this episode. We just get the section where we see Mako and Bolin escaping from Ba Sing Se and basically meeting up with Korra and so on. And this basically just involves a quick stop off to basically get their family on board the airship as well. And I think this is where we should discuss, I suppose, the aftermath of the death of the Earth Queen. That we see that immediately what happens is that the different rings are kind of incorporated together with no structure, no one in charge. Everyone just starts looting. The palace just gets completely ransacked by people. And what happens is that the kind of good, I suppose, law-abiding citizens are the ones who really suffer in this kind of situation. The people who aren't going to go out and, you know, steal and to get what they need, they're the ones that are going to suffer for this, whereas it's the people who are willing to go to the extremes, like the Red Lotus, and, you know, basically criminals, who are the ones who kind of thrive in this situation, thrive in the chaos that the Red Lotus wanted to establish. And this is obviously where you really begin to see the flaws in their kind of ideals, in that may be what they want, but it doesn't really help most people. So it's really easy to see the errors in kind of the Zaheer kind of method of thinking, and that combined with what the ultimatum is kind of also makes it kind of feel a bit kind of all over the place, in that, you know, Zaheer respects airbenders, is an airbender now, seems to give Tenzin some respect as a master, respects their history, their culture, yet himself as an airbender doesn't feel any sort of a attachment to the culture as such. So it feels a bit weird that he's willing to just sacrifice everything about this just to get Korra, when, like, in doing so, he's robbing a whole kind of nation of their freedom, which is what he's all about in the end. So it's this I think very conflicting kind of points of view, where they're trying to get across how, like, dangerous they are, but they're also being somewhat contradictory here, of like, okay, you get rid of the tyrannical Earth Queen, you get rid of one person's freedom to basically free up everyone else. But here it's like the Air Nation have suffered so much. There's only like one family that prior to all of this happening that are airbenders. Now that they're coming back, you're going to take all of that away, so a culture you seem to know a lot about, care about, just so you can take out the Avatar, basically. And I suppose this is where, like, the lack of explanation here comes into play, in that, like, does he not see Tenzin as potentially, like, a world leader for the air nomads? I don't really think he does, because otherwise I think they would have killed Tenzin, but they don't commit to doing that here. For one, because he's a main character, they want to keep him around, but secondly, I don't think they want to treat him as like one of the other world leaders. So I think that's where the problem comes in that I get that they're willing to do whatever they want to get what they need, and that is Korra in this case. But it feels like if you're trying to create any sort of positivity around their ideology, I don't think threatening a whole nation was the way to go about doing it, because it just turns them into more kind of mindless, kind of Ozai style villains, as opposed to the Korra villains who have had some justification to their actions. Here it feels like the Red Lotus just doesn't. They are the most extreme. They are terrorists. You can't really relate with their ideology, at least I can't anyway. I think there's too many kind of holes to pick in it, and Korra has obviously picked them herself. But with Mako and Bolin, the scene where they have to get their family out, again, they can't spend too much time on it because there's a lot to do in this episode, but it's pretty well done. Just Grandma Yin wanting to stay where she lives. It's her home. She's raised her family there and so on. It means a lot to her. And I like that she kind of makes that stand. She's going to be stubborn. And even Bolin's kind of emotional plea doesn't get through to her. But in the end, when she's picked up and kind of forced into safety, she accepts it as long as she can take the picture of the Earth Queen with her. And I like that to a degree. It continues with that trait that she has of like, she probably, given that they live in the lower ring, she should hate the Earth Queen, but for some reason she just absolutely loves her. And that's the one thing that she cares about in this situation. And it's emotional, they are the ones to save their family here, the family having, I suppose, in a way saved the brothers earlier on. It's fitting in that way. But otherwise it's just, they use that to save their family, so their family isn't just kind of killed or in danger for the rest of the book. And they use that to search for Korra, and we very quickly have them find the remains of the ship, find their way back to the Misty Palms Oasis. Everyone meets up, and it's basically just catching everyone up. The ultimatum is revealed here that Zaheer wants to basically trade Korra, handing herself over to the Red Lotus, basically for the freedom of the new Air Nation. And that's the big setup for how the finale is going to take place. It's going to take place at the Northern Air Temple, dealing with this kind of trade-off that is going to happen. And it presents Korra with this issue of like, should she just submit herself over, or should she try and go around this kind of final deal that the Red Lotus are trying to make? And should she put the Air Nation at risk, or should she put herself at risk? And this is obviously where we transition into like this Korra section of the episode, as she goes into the spirit world to try and confront Zaheer, but ends up finding Iroh instead. And I almost forget about this Iroh scene every time I kind of think about it. This episode, I forget it's in here. In that, I suppose it's probably the least important Iroh scene we get in Korra. But it's still nice, and it sets up the Zuko scene nicely later on, of just, the advice that he gives her here is just that, okay, you don't have anyone to advise you, but Aang always had, in addition to his past lives, Zuko. Zuko was his best friend. If you want to know how Aang would feel about something, look to Zuko, who was close enough to know him that well. And it's this perfect kind of solution of like, you've just kind of re-met up with Zuko. Use the fact that he was a contemporary of Aang, that Aang was making decisions as the Avatar, that affected the world. Zuko was as well. They had to, argue, agree with each other on specific things to get the world to this position. His opinion is just as valid as Aang's, and so that's what she does. She talks to him. We get that Zuko's, for the most part, stepping out of this part of the story to protect his daughter, who is the Fire Lord at this point in time, Izumi. That makes sense. This is him trying to protect one of the world leaders here, and so on. I think this is this the scene that properly reveals that? I think we knew Zuko's daughter was the Fire Lord from like Welcome to Republic City, the game, and other little pieces of information. But I think this is the first time the show directly kind of tells us that the Fire Lord is in fact Zuko's daughter in show, in the animation. But the conversation that they have here is definitely really nice, of just, you know, Zuko being fully up for counseling Korra in the same way that he counseled Aang, and just him basically presenting us what Aang would feel about this situation, that what Korra has accomplished, bringing back the Air Nation as far as she has, is exactly the dream that Aang always wanted to accomplish. And in Zuko's mind, he feels that Aang would do anything to protect it now that the Air Nation is back, even if that involved sacrificing himself. But he also presents the other side of things, of just like, I think personally that's how Aang would feel as a person, an airbender. But as the Avatar, I think he would also feel that there is a duty of the Avatar to not just put like one personal thing above the fact that the world will always need the Avatar. And so he just presents the kind of two sides of this to Korra, and that is the personal investment in the Air Nation versus the Avatar playing a role to the entire world. And it presents Korra with this kind of difficult decision, basically, of like, are you willing to potentially put the whole world at risk by basically, you know, taking yourself out of the equation to save the Air Nation, or are you, you know, do that, or are you more kind of willing to, you know, potentially sacrifice something you care about, but leave the Avatar in play? And that's sort of the level of decisions that the Avatar, in a way, has to make. Should they decide everything based on the world or personal decisions? And we know that Aang was always willing to make stuff on personal decisions and not just go along with what I suppose is expected of the Avatar. That's what the entire, like, should I kill Ozai thing was about in the finale, pretty much. Of like, all of the Avatars, the duty of the Avatar would tell you, you have to go against your own beliefs and kill Ozai. But Aang went with his kind of personal reasons and chose to not kill him, but find a different way. And Korra has now has that position of like, we know she cares about the air nomad. We know she cares about being the Avatar, but I think we know she's going to lean with saving the Air Nation, which we're going to see. So I thought that was a well done scene. Perhaps not as complex as maybe we would have liked, but a good Zuko and Korra scene. And it really helps that you get that little bit at the end of like, you know, her mentioning Iroh, that she's talked to him, and Zuko being like really shocked that like, wait, you've talked to Iroh like recently, multiple times, and he's shocked to hear that like Iroh's in the spirit world. So suddenly there's this extra reveal that like, okay, it's not common knowledge that Iroh passed on to the spirit world. He kind of kept that a secret when he died. Zuko doesn't even know until this point. It's a really cool tease, because Zuko's reaction is not just kind of like, wow, my uncle's kind of still out there. It's like, huh? Like, it's a real, like, shocked, like, I have to do something about this when there's time thing. And they don't. The rest of the series doesn't really tackle this at all. And I'd love to see if Zuko tries to go to the spirit world to talk to Iroh. I'd love to see an older Zuko talk to Iroh in the spirit world. See what they would say to each other at this point, because it's just such an important relationship. I like the tease of it, but I also wish they had actually done something with it. I think it would have made a lot of sense. It would have given you a way to sort of, I suppose in a way, recap some of Zuko's history that we don't know about by him basically telling Iroh what's happened. But yeah, that's that side of things. And after that, it's pretty much just getting things in place where they're like, okay, we have to warn the temple. The only way we can do that is by going to Zaofu, sending word to Zaofu to tell the airbenders to get out of there. And by the time they get there, they just basically, Korra is on the call to them right as Zaheer arrives. And it's a really, really intense scene, because you're not, I don't think you're really thinking that this is going to happen because you only just have found out that that's the plan for Zaheer, that he was heading to the Northern Air Temple. You almost feel like, okay, it's going to be like an episode or two before they arrive, so there's time for the escape to happen. But for them to suddenly cut to like shocked Tenzin on the other side of the phone, and Zaheer's right outside, it instantly turns this episode from like a good solid episode where like, okay, we're building towards the finale, into we're here already sort of thing. And I really do like that sudden shift in this episode, because this whole like remainder of the episode is so intense. They absolutely get this right, because while I do wish we had had more time with the airbenders, and I'll discuss that, they have set them up well enough to the point where you absolutely care about them. Knowing what the ultimatum now is, knowing what the Red Lotus are willing to do, you know any battle that involves our airbenders against them is going to... it's going to be brutal, and people are going to get hurt. And as well as that, kind of knowing that among the group, basically, you have Tenzin and Kaya pretty much as the only real notably like experienced characters in fighting. And then Boomy is kind of like, okay, he's part of the army, so he has kind of like combat experience, but he doesn't have like bending combat experience yet. And then like Jinora is borderline master, but she's not really combat focused as well. So you really do see that like this is a big disadvantage. Like this is four of the most like combat focused best fighters, most powerful benders going up against what is effectively, you know, a peaceful group of monks who can all do bending and all have some combat applications, but most of them don't have experience in life and death battles like this against opponents this powerful. So it gives you, I think, a little bit of an insight into potentially how the Air Nomad genocide went down. That when the attacks came, it probably looked a lot like this. That there were a lot of people who were peaceful, weren't combat-focused veterans who potentially didn't have the mentality to fight. That not everyone was going to be a monkeyatso and really defend to their last breath. So I think you would have probably had a lot of just people like this huddled up for safety, you know, protecting the kids, protecting the sky bisons, and only a select few of the masters would be the ones mainly doing the fighting. And I think that's probably why the genocide was carried out as effectively as it was, because the air nomads didn't have a formal military. They were all skilled, they were all airbenders, we know that, but not all of them would be, you know, like Aang or Gyatso level skilled at fighting. And that's why, you know, Tenzin is so impressive throughout this entire end of the episode. Kaya is as well, and Boomy, I think, surprises us with how good he is. Because everyone else is kind of just out there for safety, basically. And I think the one weakness I have with this side of the episode is the stuff with Opal. I really feel they should have altered things around to where Opal actually had some time to develop with the other airbenders before this happened. And that's where I almost feel that you could have had most of this episode combine with most of original airbenders, but time original airbenders so that it happens after Opal arrives. And that way you have like original airbenders doesn't feel as like out there on its own as like the airbender episode. Instead you kind of would have half of the ultimatum combined with half of original airbenders, but original airbenders includes Opal. That way you're getting Kai, Jinora, Opal, Tenzin, Boomy development all at the same time while other stuff is happening, potentially over, you know, 2-3 episodes. And, you know, Korra sends the call in, and it's a call to a plot point that we're dealing with at the moment, as opposed to she's basically calling a side of the story we haven't been to since episode 7. And it feels like, okay, how are things going here? It would have felt a lot better if we had got to this, like, okay, Opal settled in. We've just had the Genora stuff with the Sky Bison Hunters. Development has happened between a lot of these characters. They've settled down into, like, they all get how the training's going to go now. And suddenly the piece is shattered by what seems to be, initially like Korra just with this phone call of like, cool, we're going to talk again. And it feels like everything's coming back together, but all of a sudden it's this warning that the Red Lotus are coming, and they're right there. And what went from being this, like, initially like, oh, Tenzin doesn't really know to teach anyone, now everything's going really well for the Air Nation, and now here's the Red Lotus in to ruin it all. I think that would have worked a lot better, because the problem that we get here is that it's Opal's dream. It was the entire core of her character arc during episode 5 and 6, getting across the idea that it's her dream. Ever since she's become an airbender, she's wanted to really pursue that, and she knows that she's good at it. She's got all this advice. She has to go to the temple to fulfill that potential. Why do you skip past basically her, seeing that potential, getting to that point? What makes it look really bad is the fact that she's the one held captive to really get across the thread of this. I don't particularly like that, because it just means that it feels like Opal isn't really a factor in things anymore. They use her, I think, a little bit in the next 2 episodes, but I think it would have worked again so much better if we had seen her introduction to these characters, because otherwise it's just like, okay, Opal's there, but how long has she been there? Has she done any training? You see that she's in the airbender gear, but that's about it. And it's a real missed opportunity, because Opal is one of the strengths of this book, along with Kai, in terms of like new characters introduced. So it's always been a negative I've had with this episode specifically, that's the use for Opal that they have. It does get across the threats, of course, that like, here's her fulfilling her dream, here's Minghua just captured her. And you immediately see that, of the recruits, like, Kai and Genora are probably like the only two who'd be able to in any way put up much of a fight. But even then they know that they're just completely outmatched, and that because there's so many like rookies basically around them, there's no point even having a fight, because they can just threaten someone else and the fight will come to an end in that way. So it's really like against the odds stuff here, that the Red Lotus are immediately in charge, everyone's rounded up, and it leads to like the surprising moment from Tenzin where, like, given the situation, you don't expect him to fight back, but it's him standing up for like his culture, his like father's dream, his dream, standing up for everyone and not being willing to just like basically, and it's also like him basically protecting Korra as well, because if he just stands still, he's just letting him and his family, everyone, be used to basically potentially get Korra killed. So he's going to protect her and everyone at the same time. It's Tenzin's like big moment here. Like, he's had problems as like the leader of the Air Nation basically, in terms of his approach to teaching them. But here you see why he is the kind of inspiration. And he's just like awesome basically here. This is like, I think he's always been one of the most popular, a favorite character basically within the fandom with Korra. But this scene just gets it across perfectly. The fact that he sends the 3 of them on the ground like flying immediately as he jumps into battle. He calls out Kaya and Bumi to join him, and it leads to just this very kind of fitting fight here, in a way, of just Katara and Aang's children, now kind of obviously grown up, older, against the Red Lotus. Like I've kind of hinted at before, I think this would have a bit more impact if we had known what the battles were in the past, when Korra was kidnapped, who fought who. Because, like, Zaheer comes in here and is kind of like, it's nice to, like, meet, like, a true master airbender. And then it's just kind of like, but, like, Tenzin was involved protecting Korra in the fight from before. I know you didn't specify exactly how that went down, but, like, did you really not meet each other during that incident? Like, what happened? Because the Red Lotus seem to fight as a group. It's not like they go in completely separately. So it almost felt like continuity error, or did they really actually not meet? Or is it just that this is their first time like talking to each other, and maybe it was Tonrock who squared off with Zaheer back in the past. We don't really know. But the fight happens here is really good because it's obviously, is it our first time, I suppose, pretty much getting to see an airbender fight. And I love how they get the style across here. This is a true master airbender against someone who is just, good at airbending, very good at airbending, but isn't doing things in the exact way that airbenders do. He's not doing the typical style that you would expect. And the contrast kind of comes out here. You see the difference between, very good, has potential to be very good, but didn't get the exact training, versus a true master of the art here. And the example is basically this. It's that Zaheer is probably the more athletic in this fight. He probably has the better acrobatics, gymnastics in all of this, and he probably can do airbending moves just as powerfully as Tenzin can. So in a way, it would seem like the raw abilities would go to Zaheer here. But what ends up happening is that Tenzin and just the pure style, technique, and how he flows his acrobatics into his airbending, that's what beats Zaheer. Zaheer kind of tends to do the two of them separately, where he does the gymnastics and then does airbending, but Tenzin in the transition moments in the fight is just so much better than Zaheer. The fact that he can land and just kind of land on one leg and immediately launch an attack, whereas Zaheer has to do a kind of combat roll, kind of get up, turn around and do an attack. That's the difference. The better balance in a way goes to Tenzin, and it's a real demonstration of the kind of mastery of airbending here. And just that Tenzin is going to get the victory in this fight. He has Zaheer down on the ground. He's about to, I suppose, send him flying with potentially a finishing blow when Pali gets involved in the fight. I'll quickly cover the other two fights before we get to the ending. Minghua against Kaya, Battle of the Waterbenders. Very, very cool. I like this one because it shows you that Kaya is very powerful. We've seen that before, what she did to fight off Zaheer before. Kind of demonstrating that she's powerful, but perhaps isn't overly combat focused herself. I think you can sort of tell that by the fact that she is a little bit more of a healer, and just based on the path kind of her life took, it doesn't really feel like she is a kind of Paku level waterbender type thing. Probably not even as good as Katara was, but still very, very good. And that's the difference between her and Minghua, is that obviously I think age plays a factor. Minghua's special abilities play a factor, but I think Minghua just being that bit more used to fighting in the way that she does, used to these big fights, works in her favor here, because you see that Kaya sort of gets the advantage, which is a really cool kind of misdirection technique that kind of sends Minghua over the edge. And then you get the cool Minghua final form, crazy octopus mode thing. And this is what really gets across that her ability isn't just that she has a better connection to waterbending because her arms are made of water. It is actually psychic waterbending, the fact that she can do this. She's maintaining that octopus structure around her without really any movement. And that she doesn't have arms, so what's maintaining that? It's not her legs, because her legs are just kind of hovering there because she's using the octopus arms to kind of hold herself up here. It is her mind, and that's what she's doing here. So really cool demonstration here as she takes Kaya out. The Gazan Bumi fight is much more of a kind of humorous fight. It's meant to just be Bumi escaping from Gazan's powerful attacks. He gets one sort of comedic comeback moment, but Gazan's just physically more powerful than Bumi, bending more powerful. Bumi perhaps is a little bit more intelligent, but because the power is so much more in Gazan's favor, the intelligence difference doesn't even matter. And we end this with a pretty crazy thing that they do here, and this is what this fight does very well. They really, really get across that these fights take a lot out of the combatants. That Bumi and Kaya take a beating in this fight, and they have to basically fall down a mountainside to prevent themselves from being blown up. And because of that, they're injured on the side of near the bottom of like the cliff, basically. And then similarly with Tenzin, they give him his like last stand moment. It's borderline. You can consider it a death scene. Like I believe there was a cliffhanger between this and the next episode, so we didn't. I think that was the case anyway. We didn't actually know, like, they could have used this scene to kill off Tenzin. I think because we knew that they were afterworld leaders and stuff like that, because he was trying to get at Korra, like, it wasn't out of the picture that this was something that would happen. And so to see Tenzin get, like, just beaten up like this, like, he's taken out in this scene. Not taken out as the show defines it, but like he's out of action the way they kind of really beat him up here. But I love how even when he's on his own against them, he actually holds his own for at least a second or two, at least a couple of moves against Minghua, Gazan, and Zaheer on the ground, and it's him being taken out from a distance by Peli that really gives them the victory. Which I think gets across just how powerful Tenzin is, that he was able to, defend somewhat well against 3 on his own. It was his big using everything he knows kind of moment. So that was very interesting to see, and I remember the emotion in the fandom at this time. Like, this scene got people because Tenzin's a character people connect to. After what they did in the last episode with the Earth Queen, you don't know that they wouldn't kill someone off. Like, they've just had Kaya and Bumi, Katara and Aang's children, fall down a mountain and potentially be horribly injured or killed off. Tenzin, they don't show you him getting, like, tortured, basically, as we cut away from him. Kai, on the other side of the episode, is kind of blown out of the sky by Peli, and it's only right at the end of the episode you reveal that he survived by basically falling into a branch and like a baby bison saving him. And I love how they use Kai here, because he gets his chance to kind of be heroic in a way, return the favor of, like, everyone saved him in a way from the path his life was taking, and just saved him as well from the Earth Queen. And here he is getting a chance to return the favor to, obviously, Jinora, but everyone here, distracting Peli to allow them to sort of escape. Ends up not really working as such, but it's still a very heroic moment for him, blasted out of the sky. And Jinora's reaction especially, I think this signifies that, okay, they're being a bit, like, cutesy with their relationship, but this got across that, like, she really cares about him. Like, this is actually going to be a relationship for sure. And I thought that was really well done, that I think you could make Jinora's kind of, like, terrified reaction of seeing him potentially be killed work and establish sort of that relationship there. So that was really well done. And yeah, just to see the fall of the Northern Air Temple again, more or less. We'll see what happens to it in the next 2 episodes, but just really, really impressive how just by getting the tone right for these final battles here, they got across so much stakes that were going on here. And really it is just a couple of little issues here with not using Opal as much as I feel they should have, and then just the overall issues of the Red Lotus. Like, these episodes would have come across so much better if we had known the characters a bit more, if we knew Zaheer, knew Gazan, got a chance to see them like talk a bit more. It all would have worked, I think, much better. But the end result here is that the ultimatum is still on the table, but now the Red Lotus have, like, complete control of the temple, more or less. And Kai is the only sort of, like, loose end in all of this. Everyone thinks he's taken out. No one knows that he's still out there. He's going to be the one to sort of bring things back together to a degree. And it's all leading towards this kind of conclusion that is, of course, what decision will Korra make with regards to the ultimatum? Is she just going to hand herself over to protect the Air Nation, or will there be a plan to kind of try and counter this? Or there is obviously the potential that for the fate of the world needing the Avatar, could she have to, put them at risk for something? So that's a key setup to a degree here. I suppose one final thing is when all the characters meet up again, you have Mako sort of hug Korra again, and it's sort of meant to be the kind of conclusion to the whole Mako's awkward with the girls plot. I think the problem with it is just that it's almost an arc that they set up that never really happened. There was no real development with it, but they very clearly said that it was a problem at the start. Like, the first couple of episodes of this book, they really go overboard with having Mako be awkward. Like, them trying to convince him to come on the trip with them. It's like peak Mako awkwardness. So it's kind of like, why didn't you actually create an arc? If that's what you're committing to, create an arc around him getting out of it. Don't just kind of dismiss it as like, okay, we presented this problem, but it's not actually that bad, so we'll just get past it. Like, it doesn't have much meaning because you don't give it any focus. And so it's just kind of like, okay, you're giving Mako all these kind of like negative things that he should develop past, but then you're not actually showing development. You're just having him like get past it. And so the result is just that like you don't see any growth in the character if you're trying to establish that he had any problem in the first place. Kind of complicated to explain, but it just kind of feels like commit to the arc or don't. In that I think this book would have been fine if you didn't even have any of that, such is the way they resolve it, that you didn't even need to have those earlier scenes. But if you wanted to keep those earlier scenes in, have scenes of him talking to the girls to get past the issues, rather than like they're past it and it's just all on Mako, and Mako just kind of off screen gets past it. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's most of this episode. So overall, I'd say very good. Like the first half of the episode gets like the setup for the finale done quite well, and then the second half just amazing action with only a few little issues. I think this is definitely one of my favorite episodes from book 3. I think the fights were just really well done. But yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching, and bye.